What if the most dangerous secret inside the palace didn't come from a prince, or a duchess, or even the public-facing walls of royalty? What if it came from someone so ordinary, so invisible, that history almost forgot she existed? A royal maid. A woman who, for years, had been nothing more than a shadow, gliding silently through gilded halls, cleaning rooms no one ever noticed, witnessing moments no one would admit to remembering. And yet, according to her testimony, she saw things. Things that no one could have imagined. Things that, if true, might redefine everything we thought we knew about trust, intimacy, and power within the very walls of the palace. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. When the story first reached the media, many dismissed it. Impossible, they said. A palace as tightly controlled as Buckingham or Kensington would not, harbor such clandestine affairs. And yet, here we are, staring into the account of someone whose proximity, whose very job, granted her a perspective few outside these walls will ever glimpse. The timing, too, could not be more critical. This is not a tale buried in decades-old memoirs. This is a story unfolding now, one that demands attention, not because it scandalizes, but because it challenges the veneer of control, secrecy, and perfection that surrounds the royal image. Think about it for a moment. What does it mean when the quietest people hold the loudest truths? When a person tasked with cleaning the royal apartments suddenly becomes a key witness in an allegation so intimate, so precise, that it shakes the very assumptions of propriety and power. For years, her role was invisible. She wore no medals. She received no applause. Her face appeared in no photographs. And yet, she saw everything. And now, finally, she has chosen to speak. But why now? Why, after years of silence, does she break it here? Perhaps it is the accumulation of events, the resurfacing of individuals in public life, the endless media coverage that leaves certain truths suspended, waiting for someone brave enough to articulate them. Or maybe it is something more subtle, more personal, a quiet realization that, in silence, one carries more than memories. One carries the weight of complicity, unwilling or unspoken. The palace, after all, is not just a residence. It is an institution, and institutions demand silence, often at the cost of those who witness too much. She recalls, almost hesitatingly, the first time she understood that what she was seeing was not ordinary, not casual, and certainly not forgettable. It wasn't in the grand hallways. It wasn't during a state visit or a formal dinner. It was in a small, overlooked room. A place where the public never wandered, where records were sparse, where cleaning schedules shifted and personnel changed frequently. That first moment of doubt, of unease, was subtle, almost imperceptible. A glance held too long, a whispered exchange behind a closed door, a brief touch misaligned with the protocol she had memorized. For a moment, she questioned herself. Surely, she thought, she had imagined it. The palace was, after all, a place where reality often blurred with expectation, where appearances could deceive even the most attentive observer. But doubt does not last forever. Patterns emerge. Repetition crystallizes ambiguity into clarity. She began noticing things that could not be dismissed. Unscheduled meetings, doors left slightly ajar, hurried gestures, the sudden appearance and disappearance of individuals at odd hours. At first, she recorded nothing, hesitant to implicate herself in something that might be construed as fantasy or misinterpretation. After all, her role demanded discretion. Her survival depended on invisibility. To be noticed too much was dangerous. To remember too much, potentially lethal. Yet memory is not easily silenced. And when it comes to the intersections of power and secrecy, the smallest observations can become monumental. She started connecting dots. Sequences of events, the timings of arrivals and departures, the subtle shifts in behavior. Something was happening, repeatedly. Something that violated not just protocol, but the intimate codes of trust and propriety. She began to understand that she was not simply a witness to coincidence. She was watching, in real time, a breach of boundaries so deep, so personal, that the ripple effects would extend far beyond any single room. What makes this story even more complex is the human dimension. We often think of royalty as untouchable, abstract figures. But the truth, as the Maid describes it, is disturbingly human. It is the combination of desire, secrecy, calculation, and vulnerability. The people involved are not caricatures of power. They are individuals navigating emotions, ego, and hierarchy, all under the oppressive scrutiny of centuries-old tradition. And when the witness describes these interactions, she is careful to note the subtleties. The glances, the hesitation, the deliberate concealment. She does not exaggerate. She does not dramatize. She recounts, steadily, as if each word were measured, weighed, because she knows the power of testimony in a world where words can shape reality. The emotional stakes are profound. For the audience, they are complicated, too. You are asked to witness a private narrative without judgment, to question the institutions you thought were unassailable, to reconcile the image of dignity and ceremony with the messy, often contradictory truths of human behavior. The tension arises not from sensationalism, but from cognition. What do we do with knowledge we were never meant to have? How do we process betrayal when it occurs not between strangers, but within a system built on centuries of trust and expectation? It is also worth reflecting on her courage. Speaking out, particularly against figures of immense public and institutional power, comes at a price. She risked her career, her anonymity, perhaps even her safety. And yet, there was a moment, a threshold, after which silence became impossible. A catalyzing event, something subtle but undeniable, forced her to act. She reached out, she documented, she spoke. And in doing so, she transformed from an invisible observer to an active participant in the unfolding narrative. She became, in effect, the custodian of a secret that was never meant to see the light of day. But what of the palace itself? The very walls that shielded, preserved, and dictated the flow of life for decades now stand as silent witnesses. Protocols, staff rotations, surveillance, all designed to manage image, perception, and access, could not prevent her observations. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling revelation of all. No system, no hierarchy, no tradition is impervious to the subtle persistence of truth. It seeps through cracks, appears in unnoticed corners, is whispered by those too often overlooked. As we navigate this story together, consider this. Who is responsible for the things we see but are told not to speak of? Who bears the weight of secrecy, the witness, or the institution that cultivates it? And finally, what are we willing to accept as fact when those facts emerge not from headlines or official statements, but from someone whose life depended on invisibility, whose loyalty was assumed, whose perspective was singular? By now, you may be wondering what she actually saw, or what concrete moments she remembers. That is where the story deepens. And that is where the questions multiply. The first alleged incident did not occur in public. It did not happen during a formal event or with anyone else present. It happened in a place so ordinary, so mundane, that it seems almost unbelievable until you understand the witness's proximity, her attention to detail, and her capacity to observe without being observed. And once that first moment passed, once the pattern emerged, the events did not stop. They escalated, subtly at first, then with increasing frequency, until the pattern was undeniable. And yet, even after witnessing repeated incidents, she remained silent. Not because she doubted herself, but because speaking out carried consequences she could not ignore. But time has a way of surfacing truths. Situations evolve, people move, and circumstances arise that force even the quietest observer to raise her voice. She decided that the moment had come. She spoke, slowly, deliberately, carefully, knowing that every word she chose would have ramifications far beyond her control. She wasn't supposed to be here. That was the first thought that ran through her mind every time she walked the polished corridors of the palace. Not really. Not in the way anyone mattered, anyway. To the royal household, to the security staff, to the public, she was invisible. A shadow, a whisper, a name on a payroll sheet. Yet, she saw more than most ever could. More than anyone wanted to know. And over the years, she had come to understand something very simple. The most ordinary people often witness the most extraordinary secrets. When she first started her position, she imagined it differently. She imagined it as a job like any other, cleaning, organizing, ensuring the palace ran smoothly from behind the scenes. She wasn't expecting history to unfold around her, or secrets to present themselves in the quiet hours between dinner and dawn. But that's precisely what happened. That's the nature of proximity. Sometimes, the closer you are to power, the more truths you can't unsee. It began with small things. A hurried glance, a hand lingering longer than it should, doors that closed too softly, as if hiding more than they protected. At first, she dismissed them. Palaces are full of eccentricity. People act differently behind closed doors. She told herself that her imagination was overactive, that she was reading too much into fleeting gestures. But her instincts, honed over years of quiet observation, whispered otherwise. In those early months, she learned quickly what was expected. Observe, yes. Note, yes. Speak, never. Her colleagues reinforced the lessons. The palace is a machine, and a machine runs smoothly only when every gear functions in silence. To question, to interfere, to remember too well, these were considered dangerous acts. And yet, she did remember. She remembered everything, whether she wanted to or not. Her role placed her in the intimate spaces of the palace, not the grand halls, the reception rooms, or the public-facing galleries. Those were reserved for the obvious faces, for the cameras, for the tourists, and the ceremony. Her world was the private wings, the suites where no one lingered unless absolutely necessary. And in those spaces, she saw patterns emerge. Patterns that didn't make sense at first. Patterns that suggested there was something more beneath the surface of royal decorum, beneath the smiles and the public scripts. She recalls one evening in particular. It was a quiet night, the palace nearly empty, the echoes of footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. She had been instructed to clean a room rarely used. A small study, with heavy curtains drawn and lights dimmed. And then she saw it. Two figures, moving in a manner that was unmistakably intimate. Her first reaction was disbelief. Surely, she thought, she had imagined it. Surely, this was a misreading of shadows and motion. But her instincts, as always, proved more accurate than she dared to admit. The incident shook her, though she didn't fully understand why at the time. It wasn't just the act itself, or the audacity of it happening so close to her world, so close to her ordinary, invisible life. It was the realization that even in a place designed to control appearances, to command behavior, to shape narratives, some truths were inescapable. They didn't respect hierarchy or protocol. They simply existed, waiting for someone to notice. And she had noticed. Her subsequent days were filled with an uneasy tension. She went about her duties, but every movement, every glance, felt charged. She began to anticipate encounters that were not scheduled, to notice doors that were opened or closed without reason. Her memory became a ledger, cataloging behavior that seemed inconsistent with expectation. And yet, she kept silent. She did what she had always been trained to do. She observed, she recorded mentally, and she moved on. There were moments of near discovery. Instances where her presence almost intersected with those she was not meant to witness. She learned to navigate the palace with a balance of proximity and invisibility, a dance that required constant attention. One misstep could mean exposure, not just professional, but personal. The stakes were high, and she bore them alone. Her colleagues never suspected the depth of her observations. To them, she was the efficient, silent worker who performed her duties without complaint. No one imagined that behind the polished surfaces she maintained, a mind was recording the subtle choreography of secrecy and desire that unfolded daily. She began to understand the paradox. Invisibility granted access. The less you are seen, the more you can witness. And the more you witness, the heavier the burden becomes. She also realized something else. Memory, once formed, is difficult to discard. You can try to suppress it, to push it aside, but certain images remain. Certain patterns persist. They follow you into empty corridors, into quiet moments when no one else is watching. And when those memories start to coalesce, when the repetition becomes undeniable, silence becomes less of a choice and more of a burden. Yet, even with all of this, she did not speak. Not for years. She understood the consequences. The palace has mechanisms for dealing with leaks, with threats to its narrative. They are subtle, effective, and often invisible. A reassignment, a quiet warning, an unexplained dismissal. The systems are designed to protect the institution, not the individual. And she, like many before her, was painfully aware of the cost of defiance. But there is a tipping point, a moment when the accumulation of observation, memory, and conscience converges, when silence is no longer sustainable. For her, that moment came unexpectedly. It wasn't an event of great spectacle or dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter, more insidious. A pattern emerged that could not be ignored. And when she recognized it, she understood that the weight she carried could no longer remain unspoken. This chapter of her life, her years of watching, remembering, and surviving, set the stage for the revelations that would follow. It is crucial to understand the environment that shaped her perspective, the pressures she endured, and the unique vantage point she held. Without this context, the subsequent events risk being dismissed as rumor, exaggeration, or misinterpretation. But seen through her lens, through the careful, deliberate observations of someone trained to notice what others overlook, the story begins to take shape, slow and deliberate, but unmistakable.